Today we'll be breaking down entertainment from the summer of 2024, and we'll be discussing the Yips. This is Doctor versus Comedian. I'm Dr. Asif Doja, and this is the Doctor of Laughs.
Not a real doctor.
Ali Hassan. Every episode I pick a topic for Ali from comedy and entertainment, and I question him about it. Then Ali picks a topic for medicine and health and grills me on that topic. Today, Ali and I will be breaking down some various entertainment topics from this past summer. Entertainment we consumed, news articles, etc. And then we'll be discussing the Yips. Now, Ali, so the first part is going to be a potpourri, as they say. I believe they say that in France.
Good for you. It's the most French I've ever heard you speak. Good for you. Is that one of the news articles you read this summer about using French words to sound smart?
That's right. So that will be a potpourri, a cornucopia. How about that word?
All right.
And then we're going to talk about the Yips. We'll give people a little preview. How come you suggested we talk about this Yips? People talk a lot about it with golf, but we'll actually discuss what it is. But what made you want to talk about this?
I'm not telling you. No, it was a morning of just hearing somebody mention it in our house. We're sports fans, but we listen to sports radio in Toronto from time to time. It's a good escape from the horrors of the world sometimes. I welcome sports as a distraction a fair amount. So just hearing some of these broadcasters talk about various things, and there's one particular Toronto Blue Jay who they mentioned, might have a case of the Yips. And I was like, I haven't heard that word in a while. What is that, a colloquial term for? What's the real condition called? Look it up. There is no real condition. It is called the Yip. Doctors use the term the Yips. And I was like, this has got to be something. Come to find out, there's a neurological connection. I said, Asif Doja has got to be into this. And turns out.
Oh, yeah. I got it all for you, Ali. Stay tuned for that. But first, let's talk about some entertainment potpourri. Okay, Ali, let's get started. So this is going to be very free-flowing for people. There's just some entertainment topics that have come up over the past couple months that maybe didn't deserve a full episode, or we've already done an episode on them, and this is kind of a rehash or a re-examination of them because of some updated info. So Ali and I are just going to take turns talking about some things we've consumed.
By updated info, Asif means he finally watched some shows he was supposed to watch and didn't watch. That's the update.
That's right. Oh, no. And, well, I was going to give you an example. My first example, Ali, is the newest season of The Bear, which came out a few months ago. Season 3 of The Bear. Let's recap my thoughts on The Bear. Last year, we talked about season 1 in preparation for season 2. I thought season 1 and season 2 were two of the best seasons of television I've ever seen in my life.
And I'll be damned if I didn't agree with you.
You will be damned. Well, no, you won't be damned.
I won't. I shan't be damned.
You won't be damned. You won't be damned because we agreed. I thought The Bear was the best show on television last year, personally. That and The Last of Us, I think. But I think I like The Bear more, even though I love The Last of Us. So, high praise. It's hard for me then. And I will try to avoid spoilers, intense spoilers for season 3, because I don't believe you finished season 3 of The Bear, correct, Ali?
Correct. It remains unfinished.
Okay, so, and for our listeners, I won't spoil it, but I cannot remember a sharper decline in quality in between seasons of a show than between season 2 and 3 of The Bear. It was really, really disappointing to me.
Same director? Same team, same writer?
Same team, same showrunner, same team. There's about 10 episodes, and there's about 4 episodes of plot in 10 episodes.
But you liked Atlanta. You liked Atlanta took us on a wild journey where we're like, man, Donald Glover's not even part of this episode. What is that, right? So
Correct. So Atlanta is a completely different beast, in my opinion. It would meander on purpose. It would be experimental, but that was kind of what it was. I'll give you a quote from a Guardian article. I'll put a link to it. This is talking about The Bear, and they're comparing it to, they're actually talking about House of the Dragon, which I can talk about in a second. They're talking about The Bear.
Thank God. I was worried somebody wouldn't talk about House of the Dragon this week somewhere.
Okay, hang on. They say The Bear season 3 achieved the impossible by making an entire series of television without a shred of narrative propulsion. That is A, harsh, B, completely accurate. And I think what happened is I personally think that all the praise for The Bear, all the awards, everybody was talking about the best show. I think it got to the showrunners' heads and the writers, and they just thought, we can just do
Whatever we want.
whatever we want. Apparently, what happened was it had to do with the writer's strike, so they actually filmed season 3 and 4 back to back. So there was a cliffhanger, and we'll talk about that because a lot of the shows I'm going to talk about have a cliffhanger at the end of their season. And I don't actually have a problem with that. Like, that's okay. That's what Breaking Bad would do, and Better Call Saul. Other shows that are great also do that. So I don't have a problem with a cliffhanger. But if you ask me what the through line is, the main plot of season 3 of The Bear, I don't think I know, and I don't think anybody can tell me, including the showrunners. So it's just really disappointing. There's just there's nothing happens in it, and there's no conflict. It just, I was really disappointed. We'll see. Maybe they'll make up for it with season 4.
Stay tuned, as they say.
Stay tuned. And then a little thing. So there in the show, there's the facts. Okay, the FAKS. These are these brothers. The main brother is played by Toronto chef Ali, Maddie Matheson, who I think is very funny and I think is a good actor. And he's also, I think, a producer on the show. He's their culinary consultant. But they take up so much time in this show. It's just like, is this fact filler? It's crazy. A certain celebrity appears as one of the Fact brothers. Here's a clue. He is a wrestler, professional wrestler, and you could probably figure out who it is. It's ridiculous. And the last episode has a bunch of celebrity chefs, like famous chefs. Again, ridiculous. What are they doing there? I don't know. I was really disappointed.
What they're doing there is being part of one of the greatest shows of television from
Right.
episode 1, from season 1 and 2. Yeah.
Which is fine, but you can't just have them there. They have to serve some sort of purpose. And to me, again, it's the showrunner saying, "Oh, it'd be cool. Let's get all these chefs. They all want to be part of the show. Yeah, it'd be great." But what are they doing there? Again, you guys can watch it. Let me know what you think. But I was disappointed in that. And then, as I was saying, Ali, it relates to some other shows. So 2 other shows which I think had similar issues, though not quite as severe, would be House of the Dragon. So season 2 of this Game of Thrones, almost kind of prequel. That's on HBO. And then The Boys, which is on Prime Video. You watch The Boys, Ollie?
I have not. No, watched a little bit of it. It was filmed around the corner. Some of the stuff was filmed at a high school right behind our house. And I was so sad that I auditioned 3 times. And I was like, what? Okay. One time was for a teacher. I was like, I would have the commute to work. I would have walked right and then left, and that I would have been there in 100 yards. But I was like, I will watch the show. I want to see the teacher who got the role. I don't know what happened.
Well, there's one more season, so you can watch it. Now, just so you know, it's a superhero show, and I think I mentioned before, it is intensely violent, intensely inappropriate. I cannot stress that enough. Please don't watch it with your children. It's very awkward.
That's mostly a message to me, I believe. Asif likes to.
Yes, exactly. So both of these shows, again, they kind of end on cliffhangers, and they're almost just trying to get to the last episode. Like, that's the purpose, is to get you there. So they do tend to meander quite a bit. I still like them overall. I don't think they're as strong as previous seasons of either show, but I do see the criticism. And like I said, that Guardian article, which I'll link to, was comparing House of the Dragon and how it kind of meandered and didn't really have a lot of narrative propulsion to The Bear. Though The Bear is easily the biggest culprit in this. So I think they're all kind of related in that way. I think The Boys is the strongest out of these 3. But the other thing I wanted to relate it to, Ali, is Ted Lasso.
Careful. Watch yourself.
Careful. All good? Okay, sorry, guys. When I finally finished season 3 of Ted Lasso?
This morning.
2 weeks ago. It, by the way, came out in the summer and spring of 2023 was when Ted Lasso season 3 came out. So it took me a year, and I watched it with my family, and we finally finished it. The reason is because you want to talk about a series that's meandering and like what was up with season 3. Again, such a huge decline from seasons 1 and 2. I honestly couldn't believe it was the same show. And I think it's the same problem The Bear had. Ted Lasso should be a half-hour show focused on the football team and their goal, whatever it is that season. Make the playoffs, not be relegated, whatever it is in that season. And there was just so much stuff, like with Keeley, and then there's a psychic for Rebecca, and all this stuff. Like, it was craziness. And episodes were 45 minutes, sometimes longer, like just meandering. Like, choose the story you want to tell and just tell it concisely. And I think it really hurt Ted Lasso. And again, I think these showrunners just got too full of themselves. They're like, everybody loves everything we do. We should just do more of this. No, more isn't necessarily better. And I think that was my problem with it. So I think there is a good season of television in Ted Lasso season 3. There's some amazing episodes, some stuff with Jamie, some stuff with Roy is really good. And of course with Ted, but it takes it took me a year to get through it, for God's sake. So
yeah, I think this reminds me of Aziz Ansari, Master of None. I don't know if you remember that second season. All of a sudden, he's in Italy for no reason. And I was like, this is just an opportunity for Aziz to speak Italian and film in Italy, a place where he loves.
Yeah, and go see these chefs, like these amazing. Again, he's a huge food guy, and I was jealous, of course. It looked amazing.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that the difference is that I was willing to go wherever Aziz went.
Yeah, and Master of None is a different show. Yeah. And it's more like Atlanta in that way, and Aziz was trying to do that. So I think it's just a different show. So I was relatively disappointed. There's some rumors that Ted Lasso may come back for season 4. They're trying to get all the principal people back again because a lot of their contracts are up or over, so they have to re-sign them. I don't know. I'm not sure I'd be looking forward to that. I'm glad that it actually ended where it did, which is, I know, blasphemous for some people because they like Ted Lasso so much. So my whole point in all this is, it used to be seasons of television were 22 episodes, right? So you had to fill 22 episodes, which was hard. But now with streaming, you can tell whatever story you want in as much time as you want, right? I loved Andor, but Andor as a show, I didn't like it being episodic 1 hour at a time. It should have been 3 2-hour mini movies. It should have been like a mini series, like the old mini series that was on television. So I'll finish with a couple other things, and I won't go on a rant as much. Other things I consumed this summer. So Time Bandits is a show. It's on Apple TV+. It's made by Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement. You guys might know them. Taika Waititi, famous director, directed Thor Ragnarok, What We Do in the Shadows, and Jermaine Clement, obviously from Flight of the Conchords and a million other things. And so they obviously love the 1981, I believe, movie by Terry Gilliam. It's actually made by quite a few of the members of Monty Python. So people, I think, in 81 went into Time Bandits thinking it's going to be funny. It's not particularly funny. It's actually quite dark, and I remember watching it, and it's still, I rewatched like the last 30 minutes the other day online, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this movie was great. So innovative. There's no way you can predict what happens in that movie. Impossible. And just so interesting. And quite a bit of like horror in a sense of not goriness and horror, but it's a scary movie for me as a kid to relive that again. And so I really liked watching it. So these guys obviously have a big fondness for it. So they brought it back. Again, it features a kid who runs into these time bandits who have a map that allows them to travel through time, and they're being chased by the embodiment of evil, played by Jermaine Clement, and the supreme being, played by Taika Waititi. You might know some of the cast, but the most famous person is Lisa Kudrow from Friends, who plays the leader, in quotation marks, of the Time Bandit. So is it worth checking out? It's funny in some spots, and some episodes are hilarious. Yeah, a minor spoiler. One episode involves the main character's sister, who also goes back in time, and she's about 11 or 12 years old, from Britain. And she encounters some Neanderthals, and they end up talking like her. So these Neanderthals who learn how to speak English, but they say stuff like "in it" and "YOLO," and it's quite funny. But the funniest episodes you could tell, because at the end, you could see they're written by Taika Waititi or Jermaine Clement. Again, it's about 8 or 10 episodes, and I think like they don't all hit, but if you like the original Time Bandits, I think it's worth watching. What else did I do? A couple movies this summer. I was sick for a bit, so I watched a couple things. I saw Deadpool versus Wolverine before I was sick. Again, a great movie. I think it's made $1 billion now. It's the highest grossing R-rated comedy, I believe, of all time. It's great. If you happen to have to like Deadpool and Wolverine and know a bit about the history of these movies that were not part of the Disney Marvel movies. So in other words, the X-Men movies, Fantastic Four, these ones that came out in the early to mid 2000s, 2010s. If you know about those, I think you'll like it. I'm not sure, your mileage may vary a bit if you're not a big fan of these people, but it's still quite funny, also quite violent. And I watched another movie too, just recently. It came out in the fall. It's called Love Lies Bleeding. Have you heard of this movie, Ollie?
I have.
So this is with Kristen Stewart, who I'll tell you something about Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson. These two guys are amazing actors. Like, I think they were so maligned after Twilight. They're both excellent. I don't think I would watch any movie that they're in. Sorry, it's not like I don't think I would. I would watch any movie then because I don't think they're in anything that's bad. Like, just them being in a movie means it's probably going to be good. And she's great in this. And then there's Katie O'Brien. You might remember her. She's been in some Star Wars stuff. I think she was in Andor. She was in the most recent Ant-Man film. And she plays a bodybuilder, Katie O'Brien, who hooks up with Kristen Stewart. There's also Dave Franco, Ed Harris, Jenna Malone. And it's about this couple who get together. Katie O'Brien's this bodybuilder who meets Kristen Stewart at a gym, and what happens with their relationship, their romance, and they get involved with gangsters and organized crime and things like that. It does tend to get a bit kind of fantastical towards the end and some hallucinations and stuff, which are a bit strange, and people may not like this, but I thought it was good. It's very, very violent again, kind of disturbing, but again, like, I just think Kristen Stewart is such a great actress. So yeah, if you guys think that would appeal to you.
This is on my to-watch list, and I'll tell you why. Partly Ed Harris, with all due respect to Kristen Stewart, that's not the reason I would watch it. Love Ed Harris and everything he does. But more than anything, it was released by A24. And A24 has such a high hit rate of stuff that I always enjoy. It premiered at Sundance. It's sort of been treated like an indie film. I don't know if the budget might have.
Yeah, which basically is, it was made by, the director is Rose Glass, and she made a film a couple years ago called Saint Maud. Did you ever see Saint Maud? It was 2019. Apparently it's very well regarded. Again, a kind of a disturbing, again, not horror in a sense, but, very, very disturbing.
It was at TIFF many years ago. I remember that. I did not see it.
Yeah. Interesting. So in an interview with Rose Glass, she talked about Love Lies Bleeding, and she said she showed her cast Showgirls, 1995's Paul Verhoeven's Showgirls, right? You remember this movie, to demonstrate the setting and tone of this film because it takes place in the 80s, and very interesting. This is a much better film than Showgirls, I think, but very interesting that's what she kind of was going for with this. Anyway, so if you think that appeals to you, yeah, and A24, great track record. So if you think that appeals to you, check that out. And the last thing I'll mention is actually a news story, and I'll link to this so you guys can read exactly what it's about. So it has to do with someone who was a professional wrestler, but she's actually known as an MMA fighter. So Ronda Rousey, I'm sure Ollie knows who Ronda Rousey is. She's probably the most celebrated, not necessarily the best, but the most well-known celebrated female MMA fighter, and really put female mixed martial arts on the map.
She's also an author now, Asif.
Yes, so she released her autobiography recently, and she, interesting, also is releasing a comic that she's working on. I don't know anything about the comic.
That's what I was talking about. I didn't even know about the autobiography. I was talking about, yeah.
Oh, but the comic. Okay. So yeah, so that's the author so the reason why this is relevant is because Ronda Rousey decided to go on Reddit, and Reddit has something, as you guys know, I don't consume a lot of social media, but Reddit is the one I use the most, which has some really great stuff and some horrible things on it, but it has things called AMAs, which are Ask Me Anythings. And so they'll have usually a celebrity on, and they're like, you guys can ask me anything. So the participants can just put in a question and they'll be answered by the celebrity. And so Ronda Rousey did this, and every question that was asked, and some of them were quite sarcastic, some of them were funny, but they all related to the Sandy Hook mass murder. So what happened was, I guess around the time that this happened, Ronda Rousey posted a link to a video, which talked about that whole conspiracy, like the Sandy Hook was staged.
Sure. The Alex Jones, you sort of spearheaded, yeah.
Yeah, type thing, exactly. And she wrote something under it, I'm paraphrasing, so don't get me wrong, along the lines of interesting, or, you should check this out. which is not saying this is garbage. How could you say this about these poor children and teachers who were murdered, about these poor families? It was, oh, interesting. Maybe you should take a look at this type thing. And she never apologized for it.
But she did take it down.
She did, and she never addressed this. And every comment in this Ask Me Anything. And it was really just, it was vicious what they did, but I thought appropriate as well. And of course, Ronda Rousey or her PR people, whoever was doing that, did not
anticipate that this was going to happen.
Yeah, they didn't. Well, they should have anticipated because her PR people are stupid. But I don't know why they did that. They should have explained that this was going to happen. But the most interesting thing is, like about a week later, or a couple days later, Ronda Rousey issued an apology, which I'll link to. And it's a very lengthy apology. And I won't read it out, but basically it's probably the best example I've ever seen of a celebrity genuinely apologizing. She seems to be genuinely apologizing. I don't know what's in her heart, but for something that they did. So I suggest you read it because Ali's talked about this so many times on the podcast about how especially white male comedians do not know how to apologize for things.
White men, we don't have to just malign comedians. Right?
Oh, sorry.
We've
true.
talked about chefs.
Yeah,
we've talked about actors. We've talked about, CEOs.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and the fact that she was actually figured out how to do this, whether it was her, whether it's her PR people, I don't know, but she did. And so it was a kind of a funny, sad thing that happened and someone kind of getting their just desserts, but I think it ended up having a positive impact. Anyway, I thought I'd end my section on that, Ollie.
Yeah, that's very good. Hand it over to me. To call what I'm about to do a section might even be too generous. I really feel embarrassed about this. My goal, this summer, and we've talked about this on recent episodes about the hernia surgery I had this summer, and I knew it was going to be 2 to 3 weeks that I was going to be just sort of laid up as per doctor's orders. You just kind of do nothing and not strain yourself. So the idea on paper was like, I am going to catch up on a lot of movies I need to watch. Right? I need to watch a bunch of stuff. My to-do list keeps growing. Got to watch. I don't know what to tell you. Not only did we have no people over and I had no sort of like social contact, I also did not expand my mind in any way. No, somehow when you're lying around with a swollen testicles, a bag of frozen peas on your groin and just kind of feeling sorry for yourself, somehow, I don't know, I don't want to speak for others, but I went back to the stuff I loved. I went to my comfort food. I watched Chef for the third time, the movie Chef with Jon Favreau. Still holds up.
I tell you what, what's so funny? I haven't seen the movie.
Oh my God.
I know. I like Favreau and I like Chef, so I don't know.
I don't know what to tell you. There's no reason to delay on that. You could watch it with the kids too, by the way. You could watch that with family. Did I? I did not. I watched The Professional, 1994 Jean Reno film for no good reason, but I watched it with my children. I don't know. I watched it with my kids. We're constantly trying to figure out something to watch with the kids. That was the one that night.
That's a very interesting point. What did you think of that? And does that hold up? Because there's a lot of, let's say...
suggestive pedophilia?
Yeah, exactly. About Jean Reno's character's relationship with Natalie Portman. And I didn't really get it when I first watched it. But now that I'm thinking about the movie, I'm like, yeah, I think it might be pretty gross. So what did you think of that?
I thought there was one scene that made me deeply uncomfortable. And I was like looking at my kids, looking at the screen. I was like, oh God, what's happening here? And then it ends almost as quickly as it started. And it paints Jean Reno in a more positive light than he is in that scene. You're like, wait, what's happening? What's this guy about to do? And so, I shrugged it off and I said, the French. You know what I mean? The French, they're so crazy. I don't know. There is a scene that, it did make me uncomfortable, but it didn't linger in the sense that I didn't end the movie going, that was weird. I can't watch this movie again. And I think directors, movies like this, that the suggestion is that they should challenge your thoughts a bit. They should, but I don't want to be challenged in that way. I don't really need that in my life. But it was okay, and watching it with children as well, I could see exactly what you're saying. I looked over, they were like completely unaffected. They're just watching it. But I did have to say out loud, okay, that was a bit weird. I had to say it.
Did they like the movie?
And they watched it because their father forced them to. I don't know if they liked it. I thought they thought it was interesting enough. A little bit of violence. This kid who, I mean, more than a little bit of violence. But he's got it's Gary Oldman and it's Jean Reno and it's Natalie Portman and it's like incredible acting as well. I needed to watch something that I'd watched in the past. The kids are there with me. I need to spend some time with them. So that's what I did. It's not for everybody. Everybody's family should not be following that. I started rewatching Hacks with my wife. Of course, she fell asleep every time we start. So now I'm ahead again on my second watching. The only way my wife and I are going to watch a show together is if we do it at 7 in the morning. That's the only, there's no other.
Wait, are you caught up to the most recent
Yes.
season that just came out this
Yes.
past summer? Okay, so you've caught that up, so then you're restarting the whole thing.
I'm restarting it also from the perspective of, and this is not something I can go in too much detail about, but hopefully I will at some point on the podcast. But I'm developing something that's inspired by Hack, so I am rewatching it from a more sort of studious perspective. So that was good. That felt like I'm doing some work. Then my wife encouraged me to watch a show called Love. I love Judd Apatow. It's a 2019 3-season comedy drama called Love. Did you watch Love?
No, I did not.
Okay. After every episode, I was like, I hate these people. I don't want to watch this. And my wife was like, you got to stick with it. And then the next episode would be, "Oh, okay. And then the third episode, I'm like, no, I hate them again. Then the fourth episode was like, okay, I said that. I was like, I hate them again. It was a really, look, I understand, the reviews have been generally favorable. People are like, look, it's two people from completely different walks of life. And one of them is dealing with her addiction issues and trying to move past her history and sort of be this person who's like, my past does not define me and I want to move forward to you. And then this guy has like this neuroses that makes me, man, I'm never going to watch that show again. I stopped at episode 7 or 8 and I am done with that. And that was a waste of my time. It's Gillian Jacobs, who I love. It's Judd Apatow, who I love. There have to be some redeeming traits about the leads. And both of them sucked in different ways repeatedly in every single episode. And I just couldn't go on the journey. I'd love to hear people who watched this, what you thought. I couldn't stick with this, even though I love it all in principle. And there's some great performances in there. There's some great actors. Like, it should have kept me in. There's 100 reasons why I should watch, just could not do it. That might be my own intolerance speaking. I started a show. I did not continue, but I will. I don't know why I didn't. It's called Bookie. Do you know Bookie? It's an HBO Max show. No, it is Sebastian Maniscalco.
Oh, yeah.
I was looking for a show that my wife might not fall asleep to. Look, this woman works very hard all day. She gives the kids her entire focus. She runs around a ton. I get it. She falls asleep, but I'm also looking for somebody to watch shows with. Anyway, Sebastian Maniscalco, you might recall he had a smaller role in The Irishman. If you've seen Somewhere in Queens, which I've just sung the praises of.
Yeah, and stand-up comedian, I mean, this guy like sells out arenas, right?
Stand-up comedy aside, yeah, stand-up comedy also like really one of the biggest names to come out of comedy in the last 20 years. About My Father with Robert De Niro, I heard him doing an interview about that, saying like, I couldn't get there. There was a scene where I had to cry and I just couldn't get there. And it's like, Bobby De Niro is here. I'm acting opposite Bobby, my childhood hero, and I can't cry. I just can't get there. And so it took me some time to get to that movie. I thought he did a great job. So I started watching The Bookie. I like Sebastian Maniscalco. I think he's a very interesting, very strong actor, and I'll continue watching that. But it's called Bookie on HBO Max. And then, as we've been talking about, I have a comedy special that I'm taping in coming months. So I just rewatched a lot of comedians who I love, who have strong POVs. Nate Bargatze. I rewatched Nate Bargatze's special, Tennessee Kid, for maybe the 10th time. Great comic. You want to watch a comedian with your kids? That's one of them.
Yeah, can I just mention something about Nate Bargatze? And I don't think we've talked about him on this show, but I think he's really funny. I'm very out of the comedy world sometimes, so I only kind of saw him when he hosted Saturday Night Live this year, and I'm like, oh, this guy is hilarious. But he's so funny and has the most understated delivery, I think, of any comedian I've seen in the past 20 years. Like, I don't mean like a Stephen Wright understated delivery. It's just like, it's so funny, but you have to pay attention to what he's saying. He doesn't like yell. He doesn't. I don't know. What do you think of his comedy style?
I think it's masterful. I think he's a guy who would make a lot of people believe, like, oh, if this guy can do comedy, I can do comedy. And as soon as you try, you will be like, oh, that guy's doing some voodoo stuff. That's how does he? I mean, he's doing arenas, he's doing massive, massive venues now. And as you say, people have to be, and he's a Southern guy. He's from Nashville or outside Nashville. He's from Tennessee. Like, you got like this Southern energy that comes in and people are like, whoa, yeehaw. And then you got to just bring it all down and really pay attention to him and be connected to his style. And it's amazing. It's really amazing. The joke writing, the storytelling, and he's so self-deprecating and in a similar way to Bill Burr, who's got way more energy. But Bill Burr will always obviously be like, I don't know anything. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Why do people listen to me? Don't listen to me. Nate has that too. Like, don't listen to me. I'm an idiot. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know anything about money. I don't know anything about, my future planning. But something in there pulls people in, and then he's able to hold them in with great delivery. And I encourage you to watch Nate Bargatze, who was, I think, about 100 pounds heavier, doing Conan years ago. That was the first time I saw him. I didn't even remember it, but you can find it online very easily. See all of his late night appearances. They're all strong. What a different perspective. Like, what a different energy, different POV. And he reeled it all in, and he turned himself into this persona that he has now on stage. And it just seems so like, does this guy even go out and practice comedy, or does he just get on stage?
So like he was more out there?
He had a lot more energy. He was a big husky guy. He was husky. You know the term husky? He was husky. And
Okay, I'm going to watch that. That's really interesting. Yeah.
yeah, you should. So Nate is fantastic. It's not a style that anybody can really copy, but it's just, again, it was my comfort food. Joe List, I mentioned him recently. So unbelievably tight. He is so tight. No wasted words. So funny. I watched Tom Segura. I watched Theo Vaughn. Again, I wanted to watch comedians with strong POVs. This is because sometimes it's like, I disagree with what you're saying, but I can't deny that what you've said is funny and also an airtight argument for your perspective. And yeah, so that's my quote unquote section. I rewatch things that I've already watched and that we've talked about. I watched a movie that's at least borderline inappropriate with my children. I watched a Judd Apatow series that I disliked every single episode of for 8 episodes in a row. Started Bookie, didn't finish it, and watched a bunch of comedians. I wasted a lot of time under the guise of hernia recovery. But here we are, huh? It's a new day. It's a new fall. The fall will be different, and I'll watch smarter, more intelligent things. Okay, so let's talk about the yips. As I said off the top, it's something that somebody said on one of these sports broadcasters was talking about this, and I was like, oh yeah, the yips. And this word is always very interesting to me. Number one, I always think, is this an inappropriate word? I have 2 Asian friends with the last name Yip, and I'm like, did this come from an inappropriate place? I come from Quebec, where shepherd's pie is called pâté chinois. Like, there's no, you just got Chinese pasta. You have these weird ways of saying derogatory things and normalizing them. So that's the first thing. Is it derogatory? Doesn't seem to be the case. Number 2, is it just a very casual slang term? Like, I got the runs, I got the yips, but you look it up, and medical professionals, people who study it, people who are very interested in finding cures or doing research on the subject, also call it yips, the yips. It also goes by a number of different names. We'll talk about that as well, depending on who gets it in what field. But it's such rich fodder for study and discussion that I'm really glad I would have been shocked if you were like, this holds no interest for me, because it covers music and sports and different fields. And I think one thing I'm going to say, Asif, just before we start here, one of the most interesting things about Wikipedia is not the Wikipedia entry itself, which if you look up Yips, that's interesting enough. You go and look at the references at the bottom of Wikipedia. When you do that for the Yips, it is so interesting. So, if you look up the Yips, you'll see that it's connected to golf, to cricket, to baseball, then to music, but their stories are there in those references at the bottom, right? So you're talking about there's golf legends of all time is one link. The dreaded golf affliction has no cure is another link. Yips, more than a putting problem. The Tiger Woods era is over. Then there's tennis, right? Something about the ATP list here. Then there's different stats, somebody from swimming, somebody from cricket. There is also, I thought this was very, in baseball, people had the yips so bad that it was named after them, right? The Knobloch affliction, named after a Yankees second baseman who had to change his position. Then, yeah, Simone Biles, who everybody should know, gold winning, just won her gold 3 times, more than 3 times, a handful of times at the Paris Olympics, a lot. In gymnastics, it's called the twisties, right? And so there's this article about Simone Biles and the twisties, how fear affects the mental health and physical safety of gymnasts. Anyway, it's really, really interesting. I found it, the ugly free throws you're talking about also in basketball. Snooker, BBC Sports, this guy, his 10-year battle with the Yips, this snooker star, is that what they're called? Anyway, I encourage people, if you love storytelling, if you love looking at a rich history of something, look at those references in Wikipedia. That's probably almost always much more interesting than the actual entry. But we've got a storytelling of our own to get to here. So tell me first and foremost, what are the Yips? And why does it have such a casual, hilarious name?
Yeah, so I don't think it's a racist name, first of all. I don't think there's evidence for that, at least. So one of the issues is it's a bit of a continuum, okay? So on one end, you could think of it as being purely psychologic. And that's the problem is we kind of put all these things together. So one of it is quote unquote choking, right? Someone's trying to do something and they choke because they're anxious, they're stressed. And I actually didn't hear about the Simone Biles thing, so I don't know if hers is more an anxiety related thing and it seems by that article title you were saying that, and the other category is actually a neurologic disorder. And that's what's called a focal dystonia. Okay, so maybe we'll just take a step back and talk a bit about the history of the yips, because it's quite interesting. As you said, kind of brought to prominence in golf, where you have this involuntary movement of your hands, wrists, or forearms. And it's very unusual because the key is it's called a task-specific dystonia. So in other words, if you're putting, sometimes it only affects that, where it wouldn't affect your drive. And I don't know anything about golf, so that's about the the end of my golf knowledge, but it may only affect some parts of it. It's also been called in golf freezing, the waggles, not the Wiggles, the famous children's musical band, the staggers, the jerks, whiskey fingers, and then, of course, the yips. First coined about midway through the last century by a Scottish golfer named Tommy Armour. He said it was a brain spasm that impairs the short game of golf. So it's actually a pretty good description.
Yeah, it's a great self-analysis, right? He didn't say something's wrong with my wrist, something's wrong with, I'm nervous. He said a brain spasm, and he's a golfer, not it's quite foretelling because researchers had to work for many years to come to the fact that it's,
Yeah, exactly. And there was lots of different ones. I mean, I don't know a lot about golf, but I guess one example is Johnny Miller, who was quite a superstar in the late 70s, early 80s. And there's, I guess, a match between him and Jack Nicklaus, where if you watch or rebroadcast, they don't even show Johnny Miller's stuff because he had so many painful things.
Oh, I thought it was Greg Norman. It was also Greg Norman also did that. Yeah, there's a few notorious people. Okay.
And then, as you mentioned, like it happens in other things too. In darts, it's called dartitis. In snooker, it's called cueitis. In archery, it's called target panic. And in gun shooting, it's flinching. And in baseball, especially for pitchers, it's called the creature, the monster. Or I guess Steve Blass disease. You know what Steve Blass was? He developed it in 1973 as a Pittsburgh Pirates pitcher. And then, of course, you said Chuck Noblock? Chuck Noblock?
Yeah.
Because he apparently was so bad he had to switch positions. And one time he threw the ball so far off that it hit the mother of ESPN sportscaster Keith Olbermann, who was just sitting in the stands, and his mother got hit. So seen in lots of different sports, and it's so interesting. So I'll give you some examples. Like sometimes in archery, you can't hit a bullseye target, but if you shoot a bale of hay, there's no problem, right? It's very specific to exactly what you're doing. So this is, as you said, seen in other things, not just sports. So it's also a writer's cramp. When we hear about writer's cramp, we think, oh, that's just you get a cramp because you've been writing so much. But it's more than that. It's actually a dystonia of your hand. And musicians have it too. And one of the most famous examples was a concert pianist named Leon Fleischer in 1964, who lost control basically of the fourth and fifth digits of his right hand, so much so that he had to play pieces that only involved his left hand, and then he had to become a conductor and not be a pianist anymore.
Leon Fleischer is interesting too because he was sort of misdiagnosed for many years and treated in ways that didn't really help him in any significant way. In the end, he did find treatment, but after a lot of different things, including surgery for carpal tunnel, which they thought was a breakthrough, but it was only somewhat helpful. They said he couldn't go back to playing after that confidently. Yeah.
So this, like I said, all of these different things are, again, sometimes just nervousness, choking, as we said. But when it actually involves abnormal movements of your body, this is a type of dystonia, which is these sustained postures of either your digits or your limbs that occur because basically, I'm just trying to abbreviate the definition, but the muscles that you're trying to use, right, to do an action, you're also activating other muscles that sometimes may be counteracting the movement that you're trying to do.
That's the jerk, right? They said that it's the double pull. One muscle moves in one way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. A double pull. So we call those agonist and antagonist muscles, right? So you're trying to do something, but you have another muscle working against it. So that's going to result in abnormal movements. Exactly.
Yeah, and a very interesting thing, Asif, which you're suggesting that it's very task specific, just to highlight how task specific. Now, Leon Fleischer is a different example. His hands were curled and stuff like that. But more often is this idea that somebody cannot play, or let's say with a writer, cannot write with a pen, but then they can do every single other thing with their hands and they look like they have all the dexterity in the world, but it's that specific.
Right. So they can draw, they can knit. Some musicians, they can play certain instruments and not others. Some musicians, some woodwind players are double players, so they can play, say, clarinet and saxophone. But the dystonia only occurs with one of their instruments, like only saxophone, which is also very strange. We'll talk a bit about that in terms of the treatment in a second, but it's a very interesting thing. So again, that's why we call it a task-specific dystonia. So these often start in adults around the third or sixth decade, more common in men, and they often, again, affect the arm, the facial muscles, or the larynx, because you can also get a task-specific vocal dystonia. So singers can develop this problem as well.
But that's very interesting that it's third to sixth decade. So between your 30s and your 60s is what you're saying. So you've never seen anybody in your pediatric neurological practice?
No, extremely unusual. Extremely unusual. By the way, your third decade is your 20s, right?
Ah, yes.
That's the way age works.
I didn't know there'd be math on the podcast today.
In terms of how common it occurs in about 7 to 70 people per million. So a bit of a wide range is probably because a lot of people don't always come to medical attention. Then it's actually, though, higher in certain groups. So if you look at patients seen at performing arts medical centers, so some of the big medical centers in New York City, for example, have clinics designed for performing arts professionals, because not just this dystonia, but repetitive strain injury can occur in musical professionals, so they often have to see medical practitioners. Up to 14% of people seen at these specialized clinics will have this task-specific dystonia. And it can sometimes even, as time goes on, spread to involve other parts of the body, which would obviously be concerning.
Do you have any idea of what causes it?
Well, sort of, not really, but we think it's genetic and environmental. So if you look at family members of someone who has this, about 25% of people will have an affected family member. So there has to be some genetic component. And it definitely, the environmental thing is over practicing of a motor task can contribute to developing this. And what they think is happening is you're having what's called an impairment of surround inhibition, right? So if you think I'm trying to do a certain movement with my hand, you want to activate those centers of the brain, but inhibit the areas around that that are going to be causing these co-contracting muscles. You don't want them to also be activated as well. So if you impairing inhibition, you're going to get excitation of these areas that you don't want. So you're recruiting and activating muscles that you don't really want. They're neighboring muscles that are unnecessary for the movement. The other thing they found using what's called functional imaging is that these people, and you can imagine, right, someone who does a lot of stuff with the dexterity, their brain is going to be what we call plastic over time and have brain plasticity. And they're going to develop more and more areas of the brain, say, devoted to their fingers if they're a piano player, or their hands if they're a golfer, right? More and more areas will be devoted to that. But that can also cause problems because you have this abnormal representation of, say, your fingers. That's going to reorganize parts of your brain as you've been doing this training over time. And that may contribute because now your brain, because of brain plasticity, is different than the average person, that may contribute to the development of this. So that's what they think. These are the reasons. But one of the interesting things, and this has a bit to do with treatment, and you were kind of getting to this, is what do people do about it? Well, we'll talk about the medical treatment in a second, but a lot of people do what are called sensory tricks or geste antagoniste.
Yeah, I find this to be almost as interesting, if not more interesting, than the condition itself. The treatment of it, it's like trickery for your own brain, basically, isn't it?
Exactly. So people with writer's cramp, sometimes if they hold their other hand over the hand that they're using to write with, they can stop it. Or some people who have a vocal dystonia in their vocal cords, if they put a toothpick in their mouth, they don't have it anymore. And so we used to think years ago that meant this was all psychological, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Why would these little tricks help with the dystonia? But now it's viewed as the opposite, right? It's basically you're activating that surround inhibition by using these sensory tricks. That's what at least we think is going on.
Sure. And it's not simply you're taking your focus off the thing that gives you anxiety, right? That would be treating it like choking, which is not what, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, for example, you could try doing this, right? So, look at your hand and try wiggling just your middle finger, right? So, your other fingers will move a little bit, especially your ring finger and your index finger, but you're inhibiting the movement of those and just trying to move your middle finger. And so you're creating that surround inhibition by doing that, right? So, these people subconsciously have found ways to activate the surround inhibition. So, super interesting, as you said, Ali, that they can do this.
Yeah, practically speaking, also in golf, and I know your knowledge of golf is plentiful, but if I could just for a moment, Asa.
Can you have a negative knowledge of something? Is that possible?
Yeah, you're displaying it. Ski gloves. So some of these, in some of the research, they put on these ski gloves to putt. Looks ridiculous, feels ridiculous. Guess what? They're able to land a putt in a way they haven't been able to. Or changing, as you said, with the hand, with writer's cramp, changing something around, putting one hand on top of it. So if you, let's say you putt left, as I do, you put your left hand where it would always be, but then you take your right hand, you put your thumb over your other thumb, but then you point your four fingers in the direction of the hole, which is very, very strange, where you want to go. All four fingers straight pointing at the hole, and you putt that way. And then, again, a lot of these putters, that's ridiculous. That's not a putting form. I'm not going to be able to putt like that. Guess what? They do that. All of a sudden, the putt goes in, and it's not so ridiculous after all. So this trickery takes on many different forms, and I find it very, very interesting that it works, but it looks insane. But if if that's what it takes for you to perform at a certain level. So that's brain trickery, which sounds hysterical in a way when you're thinking about like, oh, I've got this condition. I've just got to go to the store and buy some winter gloves and I'll be fine. That's not medicine at work. Is there a medical treatment that works, or is Has there been, you see, because this article that is fantastic from the New Yorker that Asif will obviously share is from 2014. 2014, you see, Asif, a decade ago, which is another way of saying 10 years ago. Yeah. And so since that article, which was quite comprehensive, what progress has there been in this field of treatment and maybe cures?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, in terms of changing the way the brain is operating, not really. So, we can do things that can modify. So, there are some medications. So, one of them is an anticholinergic medicine called trihexyphenidyl. The brand name is Artane. Problem with those medicines is they affect your whole body, right? They're not going to just affect this one, your hand or your vocal cords or whatever. It's going to affect your whole body. So they have a lot of side effects, sedation, dry mouth. And so you could use those, maybe not ideal. And you could do physical therapy and things like that. That can help. But what we usually do is what's called chemodenervation. So you're choosing to use a substance which will almost paralyze the muscles you don't want activated for these specific tasks. And we do that using botulinum toxin or Botox. I'm not sure we've talked about botulinum toxin before on the show, but if not, we should. Very interesting. So Botox, not just used for wrinkles and things like that. We can use it for dystonia. So it is probably the first line medical treatment. And so again, you have to go see a movement disorder specialist who knows what muscles are causing the dystonia and impairing the voluntary movement you're trying to do, and then they can inject those muscles, weaken those, and then you're able to do your tasks. Again, you have to be very careful because if you do too much, then you maybe won't be able to use your fingers or your hand or whatever. So it takes a bit of knowledge on that point of view, so you need to see a specialist on that. The main drawback of Botox is that it wears off over about 3 months. So you have to go back every 3 months or so to get it redone. And obviously, it hurts a bit because they use needles, but I think most people can probably tolerate it. So that's currently it. Obviously, lots of different treatments they're looking at in the future, but for now, it would mainly be botulinum toxin. And as we mentioned, the patients using these sensory tricks to kind of get around the dystonia.
Now, we've mentioned high-level athletes, the people at the top of their game. I've mentioned all between Simone Biles and then Major League Baseball players and top of their game, masters golfers. But is this something that just sort of weekend warriors on the...
Yeah, anybody can get it. Anybody can get it. And writer's cramp is probably the most common, but it doesn't have to occur in someone who's like a big writer who's doing tons of note-taking or things like that. It can occur in anybody. And again, people often really just think it's just a cramp. Oh, my hand cramps up all the time, But obviously, again, the people who are going to come to medical attention are these sports professionals or, say, people who need to use their hands for writing, whatever, every day for, say, their work, right? Then it's interfering with your daily life, so they'd be more inclined to see people.
Okay. Just as we wrap up, Asif, I have to say something. Normally I'm like, come on, medicine, figure it out, for God's sake. How many runs for the cure do we have to do before you guys do something? I'm but I will say that it was an interesting quote in the article here, that the article that we mentioned, that the New Yorkers, there's this Stanley Fawn, who's one of the leaders in the neurological.
Yeah. I've been to many lectures from Stanley Fawn, yeah.
You know Stan? You're familiar with Stan?
Yeah, I don't know him personally, but yeah, I definitely know who he is. Yeah.
So he says that no one understands for certain what causes any forms of the yips, and no one yet has identified physical loci in the brain for focal dystonias. But that doesn't mean that the origins of such disorders will always be elusive. He reminds us that even with Parkinson's, it took 100 years before people looking at autopsies found where the actual cell loss was. So it's a game of some patience here, and there are people who it's in their interest and in their professional interest and in their area of study interest to continue researching this. So hopefully, before we die, maybe, Asif?
Maybe. That's our episode for today. Let us know what you guys thought. We had a lot of opinions in the first section when we were recapping some of this entertainment that we consumed this past summer. Let us know what you thought. I definitely had some controversial takes. Ali actually watched The Professional. I don't know. There's many controversial things. Let us know what you guys thought. drvcomedian@gmail.com, drvcomedian on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We are everywhere. And let us know what you guys thought about the Yips as well. Like I said, it was Ali's idea, and I thought it was a really good topic. Obviously, it has a lot to do with neurology, but also sports, music, etc. So let us know what you guys thought about that. Ali, you got very soon coming up this comedy special taping.
True story. True story. September 26th, 2 shows, 7 and 9. Tickets already selling very well before Labor Day weekend even. So I don't want to sound cocky here, but it feels like this show will sell out. So make those decisions soon if you're in Toronto.
Wait, do I need to buy a ticket?
We'll see about you. We'll see what we can do. We might have you standing in the back somewhere.
I better buy one. Okay. That sounds good. But Ali, just one thing before we go. Remember that although I'm a doctor, I'm not your doctor. Medical issues we talk about are for your interest and information only, and they're not medical advice. Please consult your medical professionals for actual medical advice. Thanks for listening.
Bye.